The future of the city of Atlanta is on the line. In just 23 days, voters will head to the polls to elect Atlanta's next mayor. Tonight, we're going in depth with candidates to get their plans to lead us through the ongoing pandemic and to address the city's crime crisis. Live from the WSB-TV studios in Midtown Atlanta, this is the Atlanta Mayoral Debate. Here is your moderator, Justin Farmer.
And good evening from here at our Midtown studios. Welcome to this live debate among the candidates for Atlanta's mayor. Tonight's debate is in partnership with the Atlanta Police Foundation. So much of tonight's going to focus on our top issue for the city, and that is unquestionably crime. Let's have a look at some of the statistics that we saw recently. Look at the latest numbers from the Atlanta Police Department. As of the week ending September 25th, there have been 121 murders in Atlanta so far this year. That's up 23% over the same period last year and up 68% from 2019. Now, if you're looking for some encouraging news, APD stats show robberies are down from previous months. There have been 587 reported in Atlanta as of September 25th. That is up 2% compared to the same time frame last year, but down 21% compared to that period in 2019. All right, so let's get to the evening. I want to go over some ground rules if we can, please. What we're going to do tonight is get specific as we can, please. We have 14 people qualified for the ballot. Tonight's debate featuring our top 5, that's based on the polling. We determined podium position here in our studios by a drawing. And welcome first to former Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed, Atlanta City Council President Felicia Moore, Atlanta City Councilman Antonio Brown, Public Policy Attorney Sharon Gay, and Atlanta City Councilman Andre Dickens. We appreciate you all taking the time for the city to be here. Now, you'll notice the candidates are social distancing, a bit more than 6 feet apart. Furthermore, we've all been wearing masks until just a few minutes ago. And as an extra safety measure, our panelists this evening down the hall in a separate studio. Throughout the hour, we will be joined by WSB-TV political reporter Richard Elliott, WSB Community and Public Affairs Director Candace Presley, Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Greg Bluestein, and Channel 2 anchor Sophia Choi. Briefly, here are some ground rules. Each candidate's going to have a minute for their responses to questions, 30 seconds rebuttal at our discretion. Y'all know I'm not a big fan, I'm not the big interrupter kind of guy. I'm not going to do that, but please remember there are indeed 5 of you here with us this evening. So I'll get us started with the first question, and it's one I would like each of you to address. Crime. I know you knew this was coming. The crime is crippling the city, terrorizing people, hampering our quality of life here, hurting businesses large and small. It's what people are talking about. Now, keeping in mind the constraints of a city budget, please begin with the highlights of what you would do to reduce Atlanta crime. And we begin with Kasim Reed, followed by Felicia Moore, and then we're going to work our way across the studio. Mr. Reed.
Well, the first thing that I would do is begin by visiting the men and women of our police force at roll call and at shift change, and letting them know in no uncertain terms that they would have due process and that their careers wouldn't be over because of a brief video. And then we would partner with the Atlanta Police Foundation and begin regional recruiting throughout the Southeast. During my previous terms as mayor, we hired 200 police officers a year for 6 out of the 8 years, and brought crime to record lows. So having the Atlanta Police Foundation partner in our recruitment is an essential effort. The sergeant who runs recruitment also needs assistance. That area of the police department needs to be built out right away. We will quickly hire 750 police officers. We will get all of our sworn officers off the desk and in the streets. We will have an after-hours police unit focusing on clubs and after-hour spots to reduce crime right away. And we'll draw upon the $200 million in cash reserves that I left to fund overtime on a constant basis. Because if this isn't a rainy day, I don't know what that is. The bottom line is, in 180 days, you will see the numbers go down. We will open every single recreation center in the city of Atlanta as a center of hope 6 days a week until 7 p.m., and we will bring crime and violence down in our city.
Ms. Moore.
Well, first and foremost, we're going to start with a comprehensive approach because there's no one magic bullet to solve this issue. We're going to start with our children. We're going to make sure that we're providing activities for them, after school programs and other programs to help keep them engaged, and we're going to work with our school system. But we're also going to help our cops. We're going to build the morale. I talk to many of them quite often, and we're going to make sure that there's an open line of communications between them and me, their mayor. And then we're going to get the equivalent of 200 cops on the streets additional in the first 100 days. The other thing we're going to do for our cops is to make sure that they know that they are guardians in our community, not warriors. We're also going to work with our courts with repeat offenders. We're going to have code enforcement issues around our bars and nightclubs. I'm going to meet with them in the first 60 days. And then we're also going to engage the community, making sure we have our neighborhood watch programs up and other activities to help keep us all safe.
Ms. Moore, you and Mr. Reed both mentioned hiring more police officers. Maybe no one knows better than the two of you. That's very expensive. So a quick follow to each of you. Can our city afford that, hiring these kinds of officers, giving them pay increases without raising taxes?
Well, we can't afford not to do it. That's number one. But secondly, because we are down so many officers, then that leaves capacity in the budget where you can shift some of those funds to police officers. I believe that we can work with some of the resources of people we're already paying, getting more of the officers that are sworn out on the street for maybe a shift a week. And that way we're not costing any money there. And where money will come in is I would like to incentivize those officers who have left the force that are out there to come back for a year or two on contract. We may have to find some capacity in the budget for that, but we do have a reserve fund that I'm so proud that I authored legislation to mandate it that we can tap into.
Mr. Reed, do we bleed that reserve fund?
Well, first of all, this is a rainy day, so we should use the reserves. But the bottom line is we authorize 2,047 officers right now. But in September alone, we had 17 resignations. The bottom line is that we have to repair the tear in the relationship between the city and our officers, and we need to move the human resources function out of APD into the police department and have a citywide, all-out effort, including the corporate community, to do what I've done before. When I ran for mayor before, you were around, I said I was going to hire 750 officers. I didn't hire 750, I hired 900. So we have the budget, we have reserves to pay for overtime, and we can turn around crime and violence right away. And I guarantee you that unlike Ms. Moore, I won't vote for a 51% tax increase. I never raised your taxes when I was mayor, and I won't do it in the future.
We're going to get back.
I'm going to have to rebut to that because that was done in 2009 at the end of the Great Recession. And the council members, as a matter of fact myself, were very courageous and exercised leadership in that time so that when Mr. Reed got in office, he actually had some money to deal with. We were broke and we needed the money, and it was needed, and we voted for it, and I'm proud to have made sure that our city was sustained through that effort. So that is not a vote that I regret.
Mr. Brown, specifically, what would you do to fight crime in Atlanta?
Yeah, my perspective is a bit different. I believe that generational poverty is a contributing factor of crime. I know this because I grew up in poverty, and both of my parents were incarcerated by the time I was 12 years old. What I can't seem to fathom is we talk about putting more officers on the streets of Atlanta, but we can't arrest ourselves out of this problem. We cannot continue to be reactive, and we cannot sit and say, just throw out a number of police officers that we want to have patrolling our city. Atlanta has more than 1,400 current officers. That's more than the state, the national, and the peer city average. We don't need more officers on the streets of Atlanta. We need to restructure our public safety system. And I plan to do that as mayor. And one of the first things I will do is establish the Department of Public Safety and Wellness, where we have a 24-hour non-emergency response unit. We look at refocusing the functions and responsibilities of our police. we mandate and budget a community policing unit that requires our officers to get out of their cars and rebuild the relationship with police and our community.
Ms. Kay?
Justin, you're right. This is the issue of this election. It is what I hear all over the city. People are fed up, and I'm fed up too. No woman should be brutally murdered walking her dog at night. No child should be shot on the Christmas shopping with their family. But we can't keep doing the same old things. What we are experiencing is new, it's different, it's more brazen, and we're in a different place in this city, in this country. Yes, we should fill all those vacancies that are already funded, and we've got the money is in the budget to do it. But we've got to be clear about who we're hiring and why. We've got to be clear about what we want the police to do, and then we need to recruit the right people, give them the right training, give them the right equipment, give them the right leadership, and hold them accountable for doing that kind of work. We need to partner with the county and the state to make sure that we're doing the things we need to do to keep violent criminals off the streets. We need to be smarter with technology and paying attention to the problem properties. And then community policing does not need to be a unit or a division or kind of a happy little thing over in the corner. It needs to be the way we work. It needs to be the way the police engage with our community and our neighborhoods every day to make sure that they know the kids, they know their neighbors, and they're helping keep our city safe.
Mr. Dickens, day one, what would you do on crime?
Yeah, first, let me be clear. We are, in fact, in a crime wave, and it's the job of the mayor to make sure that this is just a spike right now and not the new normal, which is why I have a comprehensive plan as it relates to public safety. It's a balanced approach to safety and justice, and it's called the Safe Streets Plan, and I was the first candidate to propose a plan. The S is the surge to hire 250 officers in the first year to replace all of the vacancies that we have, to get to 400 officers by the second year, but train all APD personnel on 21st century policing models, which allows us to be able to de-escalate crimes and to be able to focus on racial sensitivities. The A is to arrest the gang leaders that are preying on our children. The F is to have a task force with the GBI, FBI, DEA, and ATF, along with our DA, to get these illegal gun traffickers out of our community. And then the E is to empower APD to do community-based policing, where officers get out of their cars and be able to be very present at gas stations, grocery stores, bars, and also at our shopping centers, to have youth engagement where these young folks are able to be involved in games and activities, as well as entrepreneurship training, STEM, and to be able to take people from poverty to prosperity. That is one of the root causes of crime, and that's what I'll have done in my Safe Streets plan.
Thank you. And Mr. Brown, we'll stay on this topic. I know you wanted to say something. We're going to move on to our next question. We'll be talking about crime most of the evening. And our next question comes from my colleague, Richard Elliott.
This is a question for all of the candidates. A little over a year ago, we saw the protests for social justice. Most of them were peaceful. Some of them were not. Some of them became destructive riots. Each of you, how would you have handled that situation last summer?
Mr. Dickens, why don't we start with you then, since we started this way last time, if you'd answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Last summer was definitely a delicate part in our history. This was where we really heard the voices of the community nationwide and actually worldwide that said we want to put an end to police excessive use of force. But we also must make sure that we use our voices in our protests wisely to be able to bring about change. So what I would have done is actually what I did do on a number of occasions was go down to the protests to be able to listen, but be able to also share some words of advice and then have meetings therefore after to try to bring about change, which is how we came up with the 8 can't wait strategies that we all co-sponsored and passed at City Council. This is a way to be able to bring about 21st century policing and the need for more training and standard operating procedures that the police need to change. And this is what we're going to do when we go out and be able to retrain our officers in a 21st century way. That's to look at how these things occurred across the nation after the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. We will make sure that if I was mayor, I would have been down there communicating heavily to the leaders of those protesters.
Ms. Gay.
We knew this was coming. We knew it was going to happen. People were in pain. People were struggling with the violent actions that they had seen in our city and around the country with regard to police violence against citizens, we should have been prepared. We should have had a plan. I would have actually worked with the police leadership starting in March when we first started seeing these things happen. Have a plan in place for what we would do when, not if, but when it came to Atlanta, because we knew it would. We are the cradle of the civil rights movement. We know how civil disobedience and peaceful protests work. We should have absolutely had a plan in place, but then as the night unfolded, we should have been in better communication with the people on the ground. I probably would have been out there and talking to the protesters and trying to decelerate the anger. But we absolutely would have had to have a clear plan and then a clear strategy, and then the next day, and the next day, and the day after that. And you stay engaged with those young folks, and you help them figure out a way to make constructive change, not just destructive change.
Mr. Brown?
You know, I led in the social justice movements. I was one of the first elected officials to speak out against the injustices that we were seeing happening within the city of Atlanta. Not only that, but I coordinated efforts with our chief of police, Chief Shields at the time, to help organize the marches so that they didn't turn into riots, so that we can ensure that our residents had a place to peacefully protest. And we had a lot of success. I even formed the People's Uprising. It was made up of local and state officials, individuals, community organizers, activists, all came together because riots are the voices of the unheard. Folks have felt unheard in this city for far too long. And it is time that we listen to what they're saying and that our actions become a reflection of the things in which they're asking for. I had to rally elected officials to come out in March when I stood in front of the social justice movement. That should not be the case. That should be a natural instinct to be amongst the people.
Where's the line from being an active American and letting your voice be heard versus some of the things that we saw? Where's the line?
Well, I mean, you know, we, of course, don't want folks out here and disrupting and wreaking havoc in our city, but we did see that. But that's also a side effect of when community not only does not feel heard, but there's no protections in place to ensure that the residents of this city are not being killed in our city and targeted in our city like they have been. Rayshard Brooks was a perfect example of this. Ahmaud Arbery was a perfect example of this. This behavior has been transpiring in this country for far long enough.
Mr. Brown, thank you. Ms. Moore, on this topic, how do you lead a city and keep that balance between voices heard, protecting citizens, and also hiring more police officers and reducing crime?
Well, first, in terms of the question you asked about how we handle protests, you handle a situation before it becomes a situation. And what that means is that you sit down proactively and you have discussions with those who are more likely to protest. Whether it happens here in Atlanta or somewhere else, there will be more protests on our streets of Atlanta. I watched several protests and went to many of them just to observe myself, and what I saw was an inconsistency in how they were dealt with. So we need to sit down and make sure that everybody understands the rules. What is over the line and what will happen if you go over the line. We are in the civil rights movement. The city of the civil rights movement. And we know that protests and civil disobedience are ways to express yourself, and we should want people to express themselves. But we want to make sure that we do it in a way that is safe for not only those who are doing the protesting, but those of our officers who are there to make sure that no one gets hurt or property is not destroyed.
Mr. Reed.
Well, for me, Justin, this isn't hypothetical because I've done it. I've had tens of thousands of people in downtown Atlanta, and I kept the city safe and had de minimis damage to our city on multiple occasions. The first thing that you do is you open the Joint Operations Center and you run it 24 hours a day during the time. The second thing I would do would have been to talk to my chief and to make sure we had our officers in plain clothes who were actually interacting with the protesters, but we would have had a stronger force staged off-site. I then would have called the governor and asked for coordination between the Georgia State Patrols to keep the traffic flowing and safe on our interstates and expressways. And then as mayor of the city of Atlanta, I would have called the Urban Area Security Initiative and asked for help from our surrounding partners. The difference between me and others is I did it. I've handled a protest on West Paces Ferry, gotten up at midnight and went to sit and visit with protesters and made sure that it's safely resolved. I've done it again and again.
Mr. Reed brings up an interesting point as he referenced that he would call in the governor and state resources.
I didn't say I would call in. I said I would coordinate our activities between the Georgia State Patrol to make sure that the interstate continued to flow freely.
Pardon me.
It's a partnership.
Coordinate,
It's not
a
calling.
partnership. Thank you. So is that something that the other candidates, Ms. Moore, would you welcome a partnership at times such as those between the city and the state? Because we know there's been friction in our history between the city and the state.
Well, I believe that, as I have seen it, there are always been coordinations between our state patrol and our police department, and they've worked in tandem with each other on many issues. So I don't think that a protest would be any different, and it hasn't been anything different than I've seen before.
Excellent.
Justin, can I
Please.
speak on that? When the protests happened in Atlanta, I built my relationship with Governor Kemp through a conversation around the looting that was happening downtown in our city. And we had a very generous conversation about what needed to happen to correct this problem. Now, we didn't agree on everything, but that coordination to ensure that folks were not being unjustly arrested and charged as they operated and expressed their freedom of speech in this city, that's how you get it done. And I not only led in that effort, but very few elected officials stood behind me in that effort. Many folks frowned upon our protesters that were exercising their First Amendment right in this city, and that's unacceptable.
I want to speak on that. Getting it done is not having millions of dollars in property destroyed and having to call in the National Guard on your own people. Getting it done is having your own police department that you build to 2,000 officers and managing the protests that allows folks to have their voices heard. We had the Occupy movement in the Woodruff Park. I asked Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights hero, to go and negotiate on our behalf. And when they declined, we began to remove folks from the park. The other thing we had to do is to open our jail. I mean, to have closed the jail and left it closed in the middle of a global pandemic with thousands of people protesting, it's very unhealthy for the city not to control the jail, because if you leave arrest to the state, you take away your ability to prevent people from having a criminal record. And when you open your jail, people can protest and be released on signature bond. But getting it done is not having Lenox Square Mall rammed through and ransacked as other businesses were.
I want to pick up something right there. When it comes to the jail and it comes to the youth detention centers, I want to know where everyone stands on these topics. Mr. Dickens?
Yeah, I think that, currently we have the Atlanta City Jail, which is ACDC, and we have tremendous overcrowding in the Fulton County Jail. Right now, it's during COVID, and it's almost, just unfathomable in terms of the human situation that's there, where people are stacked on top of each other and down the halls. So as I have often said, I would like to see this 1,300-bed facility that we have, the Atlanta City Detention Center, to be able to be used for multiple purposes. I also know that right now there's an overcrowding issue at Fulton County Jail, and I was interested in seeing if there was a temporary use for 6 months for about 500 inmates to be able to come over to our city detention center on a temporary basis, because I would like for our city detention center with 1,300 beds to be able to be used for things that bring about wellness and equity and opportunity for people. And I think you can try to design it architecturally to be able to have mixed use, where if you need to have certain floors designated for detention center for times, you can do that. But at other times, you have a lot of people experiencing behavioral challenges. We have protests that occur. We have public issues that occur where we need to make sure that we have a place to have people for a limited time.
So you're opening it?
Yeah.
Ms. Gay?
Yeah.
We have a crisis with the Fulton County detention facilities. It has been overcrowded even before COVID, and now with the pandemic, it is even more overcrowded. And people are being housed in inhumane conditions. We have a moral obligation to house people safely, even people who've been accused of violent crimes. So absolutely, during this period of time, I would be in full cooperation with the county to make sure that we were doing the best we could for those people who are arrested, who are also, in most cases, probably city residents. But we also need the city jail in order to have places to put people who've been accused of violating city ordinances, slumlords, egregious violators of codes. We need to be able to have places to process city violations, and we lose our control over that. We lose our control over how they're charged, how they're treated, if we only have the county facility. Yes, people who need diversion into public health or drug, alcohol, or treatment need to have that opportunity. But I, at this moment in time, certainly would not close the city jail.
Mr. Brown.
So I do believe we should be closing the Atlanta City Detention Center. At its peak, we had 700 to 800 detainees at this center. 90% of them were African American. Something doesn't make sense about that number. And it's obvious that when you have cities like NYC, New York City, that have experienced stats similar to this, they're under court order and federal oversight for disproportionately impacting African Americans in their city. And we think it's okay to continue to criminalize poverty in the city of Atlanta over city ordinances that we should not even be arresting folks over. We should be moving them into care and services and giving them an opportunity to readapt themselves and reacclimate back into society. We cannot continue this system. This public safety system now, this criminal legal system now is broken, and we must reimagine it.
But in a real world stance where you've got the Fulton County Jail overcrowded and there are people who need their day in court and that system is taking so much time, where would they go?
Well, I believe in Mayor Bottom's plan around recidivism, where my mother came out of prison with no resources and opportunities and found herself repeating the same offenses over and over again. If we can move those folks in Fulton County into ACDC through a recidivism program where we can provide wraparound services and support, build a center for equity and wellness, then we wouldn't find ourselves in this cycle of crime and repeat offenders constantly coming through the same system that is not working. Our municipal courts are on the front line, and they can tell you every day the disproportionate impact of the residents in our city while we sit and criminalize poverty in this city.
Ms. Moore, the jail.
Yeah, so a Center for Equity and Wellness is desperately needed, and there are plenty of opportunities for us to provide those services and in coordination with Fulton County as well as the state. However, I believe the jail, which is now open, should remain open, and we should immediately include those talks with the sheriff, allow him the 500 beds that he wants or more. And on the long term, I think we need to look at whether the city wants to continue owning the jail. Do we want to do a sale lease back where we lease back a portion of it so that we can house people for municipal offenses so that they don't have to have a state charge if they're arrested for a city violation? But I do believe after visiting there and bringing me up to tears, it is inhumane the way people are being kept. People have to remember many of them are innocent until proven guilty, and for them to have to live in those conditions when we have a perfectly open and functional facility that they can go into, I believe we have a right to do so.
Thank you. Our next question now.
No, I got
I'm sorry, you started, but okay.
No. Ladies and gentlemen, this conversation, this is the problem. The jail is housing less than 50 individuals. Sheriff Patrick Labatt, who is doing a phenomenal job as sheriff of Fulton County, has a jail that's under a federal consent decree. If you care about humanity, if you were in office right now, which a number of these folks are right now, you would have gotten a deal done to begin moving prisoners off of the floors in Fulton County right now. The bottom line is nothing's been done. Further, Atlanta has 550 repeat offenders. They're not nice people. There are people who have been convicted 10, 20, 30 times. They're robbing your homes. They're burglarizing your vehicles. They need to be put in jail, and we need to preserve 550 spaces for them. But the bottom line is, it's been all talk, and absolutely nothing is getting done to make you safer.
Thanks to all of you on that. Our candidate questions will resume here after a short break. This is the Atlanta mayoral debate, live on WSB-TV.
Every time I'm out on a story, I'm thinking, why does this matter to the person who's on the other side of this camera lens? We do a really good job of giving viewers context. So this may have happened 3 counties over, but why does it matter to me? And that's always been a goal for WSB. We give you everything in one place, everything you need for the day ahead in one place. When you're getting the kids ready, when you're getting yourself ready, just have us on. I promise it's gonna be worth your while.
And we welcome you back to the Atlanta mayoral debate in partnership with the Atlanta Police Foundation. We're live here from the WSB-TV studios in Atlanta. We have the top candidates who would want to be Atlanta's next mayor. Now, a question from our panel and my colleague, Candace Presley.
Thank you, Justin. My question is for former Mayor Kasim Reed. You've been very specific about your plans to make our city streets safer, specifically with violent and property crime. What assurances can you give Atlanta voters that a third Kasim Reed administration will be scandal-free?
Well, I think what I can assure them is that my name and my integrity is intact, and I handle the office of mayor honorably. But more than that, I know that I can do the job because I did it. What I can assure them is that as it was before, crime when I left was at 40-year lows. I hired 2,000 police officers, built the largest force that it's ever been in the history of the city. And I've been spending time talking to Ambassador Young, and he's supporting me for mayor. And what we've talked about is everybody who has had this job has had accusations and lies hurled at them. I've gone through this process. I accept responsibility for the people who did wrong in my administration, and I have a concrete plan to move forward and make sure that it never happens again. Making sure that every single person that serves in my administration releases their income tax returns on April 15th, along with myself. Making sure that all of my direct reports go through quarterly ethics training. Making sure that we have lobbyist registration at the City of Atlanta, and making sure that each and every person that serves with me goes through a deep background check before they begin working for Atlanta. Thank you for the question.
Ms. Moore, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just have to rebut that because I'm going to use Mr. Reed's own words. He's done it before, and he'll do it again. And he's doing it now. And I would just say to the citizens of this city that we do not need the distraction of the corruption, of the cloud of corruption that hovers over City Hall because of a Reed administration, because next year we will be having a lot of trials and a lot of those issues will be coming to fore, and we have a lot of emerging issues. We don't need to continue to have this cloud of corruption over City Hall. It will not be scandal-free because it's not scandal-free now, and it was from the Reed administration.
Well, if Ms. Moore wasn't so concerned with raising your property taxes to 51%, voting against video body cams for police, voting against recreation center, she likes to talk about me and corruption, although I'm not under investigation and was never accused of wrongdoing because she has no record of her own. Again and again, she voted against public safety. Again and again, she voted against rec centers. She raised your property taxes 51%, but she didn't take the property tax increase and use it to hire more police. She used it for her own pay raises.
Ms. Moore, 30 seconds for the last word on this.
Most definitely. The pay increase, the tax increase is where I exercised leadership and courage. When I was running for re-election, We were broke in this city. And for order for Mr. Reed to have any money to deal with when he came in with mayor, you had to make the tough decisions. And that's why you should elect me. I can make the tough decisions. And as to the body cams, I'm actually the council member who put in the legislation that asked for body cams. I didn't vote for the body cams that the Reed administration wanted to do because it was a shady deal.
Yeah, and so when she raised your property taxes, the city was still broke. When I was elected mayor of Atlanta, we had a $52 million budget deficit. So let's be clear, people. She didn't raise property taxes for me. She raised them for herself. And when she raised your property taxes 51%, she didn't use it for police or fire or others. She used it just so they could break even. I had a $52 million budget deficit. The city was broke. We had to reform the pension system to free up cash for public safety so we could hire 900 police officers.
Don't believe the spin.
Thank you both. Mr. Dickens, you have something?
Yeah, I think Candace's question was about to make sure that an administration by Reed would not be scandal-free. And so we have to look back at the previous administration that Reed ran, which had 7 individuals get convicted or indicted of crimes. And so when you have 7 individuals that happens that are your top officials down the hall from you, that's happening right under your nose, either you were in on it or you were grossly negligent in watching the shop. And so how do you plan to make sure that either or those cases don't occur again, because it was embarrassing and it cost us millions to be able to deal with these investigations?
You know what? That's a terrific question from Mr. Dickens. I know he had a really tough week. But let me tell you this, one of the policies that I've already announced is to make sure that no individual who's had a personal bankruptcy or a business bankruptcy would ever work in my administration. That would disqualify Mr. Dickens because he either had a personal or business bankruptcy where he claims he built a small business, but that business was run into the ground and they had to file bankruptcy. Now he wants to run the $2.3 billion operation that is the city of Atlanta.
You had your hand up, I believe.
Well, actually, he still didn't answer the question. This is constant deflection. No, this is still constant deflection. And then you turn it to me and my bankruptcy. But the question that Candace Presley asked you a question. Yes. The question was to make sure you're scandal-free. We can talk about my bankruptcy, but we're talking about you and an administration that literally has 7 people right under your nose get convicted or indicted and a federal investigation.
And we also had AA+ credit from Standard & Poor's and $200 million in cash reserves that you spent like a reckless sailor. And you walk around talking about your business achievement and tech bridge this and tech bridge that. You ran a small business into the ground. You had 20 employees. You've never talked to the public about whether you ever paid all of the creditors that you left behind. And now you offer yourself and say, I want to be the CEO of the city of Atlanta. I took this city from being near Detroit, 2 levels above junk status. When I walked out of the door, the city of Atlanta had AA+ credit from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch. And I tell you what money's not missing, the $200 million that you dip into every time you want to pay for something.
All right, we are going to move on from here to AJC's political reporter, Greg Bluestein.
Yeah, I want to ask a question about what...
Greg?
Yes, the emerging issues that Ms. Moore said were going to come up for the next administration. No matter which one of you is elected, when you take office in January, you might be confronted with what state lawmakers could do in terms of voting to allow a referendum on the city of Buckhead. So what specifically would you do as the incoming mayor to prevent that vote from being approved? Even if you can't do anything about stopping the lawmakers from allowing the referendum, what would you do to convince Buckhead citizens that they need to stay a part of Atlanta?
I believe you said Ms. Moore.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I will be meeting with those who want to leave our great city. And of course, I'm not expecting that I will change their mind, but you have to have those conversations. Secondly, I will be living under the Gold Dome, meeting with the governor, meeting with the top leadership and those who will be voting on it to try to starve it off. And also making the case while what they really want as a result of what they're doing, they're not going to get. in separating from the city of Atlanta. And if all that fails and they do get the referendum, from day one, I'm going to be working as mayor to work and make our neighborhoods safer, to make sure that we get the city services that people are paying for, to make sure that it's being done transparently, ethically, and with accountability to the people that we serve. And by the time that gets on the ballot in November 2022, I believe a majority of the people in the area that would be voting will vote to stay in the city of Atlanta. It happened once before with Eagles Landing, it's from Stockbridge, and it was voted down, and I will make sure that it's successful again if it gets to that point.
Yes, yes, Antonio Brown on city of Buckhead, Buckhead City.
So I think the buck has to stop here, right? Because I understand that Buckhead wants to feel heard. I think it's important that Buckhead feels heard and that we are able as a city to communicate with our communities. But it's more than just Buckhead that feels unheard or feels as though that what they're seeking in their communities, their roads being fixed, feeling safe, and their businesses being supported. This is not just a Buckhead issue, and we continue to bring it back to Buckhead, and I recognize that they have a substantial tax base in our city. But we also have to recognize there's a ton of other communities in Atlanta that feel forgotten about. Where does the buck stop? What happens when another community says that they want to secede from Atlanta because they don't feel heard? Where does it stop?
Yep, Mr. Reed.
Wait a minute,
If the city,
wait a minute.
hold on 1 second, please. If the city, if Buckhead leaves Atlanta, what happens to Atlanta?
Buckhead leaves Atlanta, bad things happen to both. Folks in Buckhead are going to be paying significantly higher taxes, and folks in Atlanta are going to be paying significantly higher taxes. And every problem we have, Justin, is going to get much harder. Certainly the public safety framework, and we will have thrown our national and international reputation as a city too busy to hate. We'd have thrown it into the trash bin. And that's why the first thing that we need to do is to reduce crime. And what I would do is galvanize the largest concentration of Fortune 500 businesses in America outside of New York and Houston to act as my partner as we go to the Georgia General Assembly, where I served for 11 years, and where I have long-standing relationships in the House and the Senate, and where I delivered concrete results working with Governor Nathan Deal again and again and again for the people of Georgia, including assisting with deepening the Savannah port.
Ms. Gay, you wanted to...
Yes, I want to answer the question that was asked to us, which is about Buckhead cityhood. Absolutely, they deserve to be heard. Their concerns are serious, their concerns are valid, they deserve to be taken seriously. But this is about leadership. Just like everything else in this election, it's about leadership. What would you do as a leader? And what I would do as a leader is show up in Buckhead and also show up over the Capitol and say, give me a shot, because here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to substantially turn around crime. Here's my 4-point plan of how we're going to do it. I'm going to engage the business and civic leadership to help coordinate better with the county and the state so those parts of the plan work better. I'm going to substantially reform procurement, because we also have the other existential threat of the bill to take the city's airport away. And that is all about procurement and purchasing and corruption, and I would change that. And then I would absolutely focus on health in our neighborhoods, because if our neighborhoods are healthier, fewer children are going to turn to crime, and that will make Buckhead safer and make everybody else in the city safer, including the people in the neighborhoods that are seeing the most crime.
This proposed Atlanta and Buckhead divorce will be unnecessarily expensive for both spouses. And the children, Atlanta Public Schools, will be the one who will suffer the most. This is why we can't have this to happen. I've lived in Buckhead, Northwest Atlanta, Midtown, and Southwest Atlanta. And what we know is everyone wants to feel safe and everyone wants to feel heard. This is why I have my Safe Streets Atlanta plan, which will make sure that we fill these 250 vacancies and that we'll have these officers out and about, walking the beat, being able to be in front of gas stations, bars, and shopping centers so that everyone across the city feels safe. I'll be a hands-on mayor, one that will be very accessible and attentive to the needs of the community as I am as a city council member. This is what we want. We want one city with one future, and I'll make sure I keep you safe, and I'll make you proud.
Thanks to each of you on Buckhead City. Now to my colleague, Sophia Choi.
Good evening. COVID affects all of us, and yet not a single candidate even mentioned COVID in campaign ads. Atlanta got $88 million in federal CARES Act money. The new mayor, the next mayor in the springtime will get half of that funding. What are you going to do with that money?
Sophia, who do you want to start?
We'll go with Council President Felicia Moore.
Well, first we're going to assess where we are with the $88 million. We're going to make sure that we keep people in housing. That's the number one thing that I want to make sure is that people are not subject to being eviction and adding to our unsheltered population on the city. The other thing is we want to make sure that those workers who are vulnerable are still getting their hazard pay. We're also going to make sure that our small businesses have resources that can help them through the pandemic. People don't think about all of the PPE and things that these restaurants and small businesses have to order, how that hurts their bottom line while they're even trying to make it through this pandemic. And we're also going to make sure that we spend the money wisely and honestly, and that we're going to make sure that it is spent in a frugal manner so that we can get the best bang for our buck. And I do think that we can get some philanthropic dollars that can match some of the money we have so we can stretch it and do more for our citizens.
If anybody else wants to weigh in, they can, or we'll move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Gay?
The thing we ought to be all talking about now, and I think all of us are, is get the vaccine. You know, that's what our civic and business leadership ought to be talking about absolutely every day. Get the vaccine. It protects you, it protects your loved ones, it protects the people you know, and it protects their loved ones. And that should be the role of leadership every day, to focus on that public health necessity. We'll see where we are in January. I'm very worried about evictions now that the eviction stays are winding down, and in Georgia it's really easy to evict someone. So I would pay first and foremost attention to make sure that people who are on the verge of losing their homes can stay in their homes. We would use those resources to try to make that happen. We would also make sure that the most vulnerable among our homeless population has the safety and security they need so that that problem doesn't get worse. And beyond that, we need to pay attention to make sure we use those resources to deliver city services as effectively as we can, because we have a lot of labor shortages right now, and we may need to pay more to get people to do the jobs we need them to do.
Mr. Brown, then Mr. Reed.
Yeah. So let's be clear, the $88 million has primarily already been allocated. So to say what we're going to do with funds in which the city has already appropriated, I think is misleading. I believe that we need to focus on the education of the vaccine to rebuild the trust with the public. Right now, the vaccine doesn't prevent you from contracting the COVID-19 virus. It reduces the symptoms. And I believe that if we educated our community, our residents, then they would trust the process and potentially seek the vaccine. The other thing is we've got to lift up our small businesses, but our startup small businesses, they have been left behind. Through this $88 million allocation, startup small businesses received nothing in this city.
Mr. Reed, on COVID.
The city has 8,500 to 9,000 employees. The first thing we've got to do is get our folks vaccinated or tested. Last year, Americans lost 1 year of life expectancy. Black Americans lost 2.7 years. So what we've got to do is galvanize the corporate community. We also need to contact all of our elected regional partners and make sure their workforces are vaccinated and tested. As the home of the CDC, which was annexed into the city during my tenure, I would also ask for an embedded executive so that my administration has the very best advice possible on this issue. I also think that we need to focus like a laser on making sure that every single penny available gets to somebody that's about to lose their home, either to a rental crisis or a mortgage crisis. And finally, I think that we should call the governor and work in partnership with the state to get the state money that was meant to prevent people from losing their homes and being put out in the middle of this pandemic.
Mr. Dickens.
Yeah, so this is important to know. The $88 million is actually times two. So it was $88 million that we got earlier, and we're going to get another tranche of that in March. And we are looking at using that money for a number of things. And I think it's important to note that we used a lot of it in the beginning for the homeless to be able to have a place to stay. We actually got a hotel to be able to house and rapidly rehouse 800 individuals. So we have put the money to good use. And now this next $88 million, $20 million of it is designated for small businesses, nonprofits, and the arts. It is important for us to know that we have to spend time trying to educate the public and educate our own employees on this. We're at about 70% vaccinated in the city staff, but out of the 8,500, but a lot of them that are in DPW and other departments that are out in the streets, they're a little bit less. So incentivizing them to get the vaccine and to encourage them to get tested often and frequently. One other thing I'd like to say is coordination with our Atlanta public schools has been tremendous. As you see, our schools have not shut down. We have stayed open, and that's due to being about the science, being driven by wearing masks in the schools, and making sure that we have the opportunity for supplemental child care, which is very important for our citizens.
We want to get to closing statements, and I don't want those to be cut short. So this is a very brief question, Mr. Reed. As it relates to police morale,
Yes.
it's suffering.
Yes.
Right? And so the question, as this is an Atlanta Police Foundation partnership debate, is attrition in the force and the inability to hire officers and other things we've reported that some officers are reticent to do their jobs the way they may want to do their jobs in some instances because they feel a lack of support. How do you fix that?
I think you fix it by doing what we're doing right now, make a full-throated commitment that they're going to have due process. They're worried that their careers are going to be over in an instant, Justin. And they're worried that folks aren't going to stand behind them. You've got to go roll call by roll call, shift change by shift change, and look them in the eye and make the commitment. And then when a moment comes during your mayoralty where there's a decision to be made, make sure that they have due process, even if the ultimate decision, Justin, is that they have to go in a different direction. We have increased pay for our police, but their equipment's in horrible shape. Their uniforms are in horrible shape. The tools that they need to police are in horrible shape. The good news is we actually have an influx, Justin, in interest. But even right now, the department that handles recruitment and the sergeant that leads it is understaffed. The most important thing is to have a mayor that stands shoulder to shoulder with the police department in turning around this crime and violence.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I'm going to give you 10 seconds on this, and then we have to go to closing statements.
We all want this one.
Yes, we
Of
all want
course,
this one.
dealing with the officers, their morale, letting them know that they will have due process. But the other piece to that is having conversations with the community so everybody understands if there's an officer-involved incident, what will happen, what's going to happen 1, 2, and 3, so that we're all having the same expectations.
Thank you. I apologize, you guys. We just have time constraints. So if you want to address it in your closing remarks, by all means, address it. As it is now time for our closing remarks, each candidate is going to have a minute. We determine the order through a drawing. We videotaped it if you don't believe us, and we begin with Sharon Gay.
This question of public safety is about the same thing that this election is about. It's about leadership, it's about toughness, it's about experience to do the job. I have a different background than the rest of you, so let me tell you how I got here. I went from growing up in a town with one high school to being the Atlanta managing partner of the largest law firm in the world, when women were just being hired in the workforce as lawyers. How did I get there? I was sexually harassed, I was sexually assaulted, I was pushed up against walls, I was shoved up against doors and windows, I was forcibly kissed, I was improperly touched, I was hit upon, I was solicited, I was leered at, I was talked about, was discriminated against, disregarded, dismissed, treated with derision. I had to fight my way into the room. I had to fight my way to get a seat at the table. I had to fight my way to ultimately be at the head of the table, to running the deal and ultimately running the entire place. I know how to do this job. I have those leadership skills. I have that toughness. I have that tenacity. And if you make me mayor, I will make Atlanta safer. I will make Atlanta more just. I will make Atlanta more equitable. And I will make it a better place for all of us.
Our next closing statement from Kasim Reed.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for letting us come into your home. Last month in September, 17 police officers resigned. Our police department is down to 1,340 officers, while the city has grown by 71,000 people. It's the reason we're unsafe. We've had a 58% surge in violent crime, and 157 people were murdered, and we're on the way to lose even more people. I can do this job. I can turn around this tide of crime and violence because I've done it. I built the biggest police force in the history of the city. I delivered crime at 40-year lows, and we had the largest economic boom in our city in 40 years. When I was mayor, people were raising their hands to come into Atlanta, at Emory and the CDC. So the bottom line is, I may not be the person you want to have a beer with, but I am the person who can get you home to have a beer with the person that you want to have it with. I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Felicia Moore.
Hello, Atlanta. I'm Felicia Moore, and I want to be our next mayor. I don't want to continue to have to field calls at 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning from victims of crime in this city. And so my 5 C's plan that you can see on my website addresses comprehensively how we can get every neighborhood, in every zip code, in any income bracket in this city safe. But we can't stop there because you're paying dearly for services that you're just not getting. I don't want to get any more calls that you can't get your yard trimmings picked up at your house. We're going to work on getting our city service delivery up and running. But importantly, we've got to have your trust because there are going to be some tough decisions that are going to be made. And so we're going to have a transparent government so you know how your money is being spent and that it's not being abused, and it has been abused. We're going to do it ethically, and we're going to do it with accountability. I'm going to be accountable to you, the people I serve, and I'm going to hold myself accountable and everyone in my administration accountable to delivering for you.
Andre Dickens.
Not me.
I'm Andre Dickens, and this election is about the future and the soul of the city of Atlanta. Are we going to move forward in peace, productivity, and prosperity, or are we going to go backwards to displacement, destruction, and corruption? I say we move forward to a city that's going to be prosperous, equitable, and safe. That's why I have my Safe Streets plan, which has been vetted by former police chiefs across the nation. And of course, we have people wanting to join our force because in 2019, Mayor Bottoms and this council actually gave police the largest raise in the history of the city. I will also go to roll calls, which I did this week in Zone 1 and talked to the officers and also gave them a meal. This is important. The officers want to make sure that they can get crime out of the streets, but don't have crime in the suites. Corruption is a crime. So the suites of City Hall will be crime-free when I'm mayor. We'll also make sure that we build affordable housing and that we will train people to go from poverty to prosperity with my Tech Bridge program and so many others to get thousands of people great paying jobs. I'll make sure that we grow this city in a balanced way. I'll make you safe and I'll make you proud. I'm Andre Dickens.
Our final closing statement from Antonio Brown.
Thank you. Our city leaders have failed us for decades in this city. Our public safety system is broken. Our leadership is reactive, and they're only seeking to treat the symptoms instead of truly curing the cycle. They have sat here today and told you about all the great things that they want to do for the city of Atlanta. But you have to ask yourself, why haven't they been done yet? We are standing on the precipice of Atlanta becoming this great international city we talk so much about, or becoming a city we don't even recognize. As mayor, I will create a socioeconomic shift, moving our residents in poverty to our working middle class, and lifting up our working middle class and supporting our small businesses to create an inclusive and thriving ecosystem where no Atlantan is ever left behind again. Thank you.
Thanks to our candidates. We are out of time. We appreciate you all making yourselves available to the citizens.
Thank you.
From us at WSB, have a wonderful Sunday evening.